The guilt of cheating on my husband. I got married when I was 17 and Steve was 22. Now our 12-year marriage has come to an end. I had cheated on my husband. It was a story as old as the world. I was out of town, on the East Coast, taking a job training class. The class lasted 6 weeks. I'm 29 now, so it was no surprise that everyone in the class was actively socializing with me. The men did it all the time, and some of the women did too. One of the guys, Mark, a classic stocky, tanned, trim alpha male, caught my eye. On the first day of class, we split into teams of 2, and he headed straight to me to ask to be his partner. I said yes. I'll admit it. I liked him. From the beginning, I felt comfortable with him. He wasn't as handsome as my husband Stevie. He wasn't in as good shape as Stevie. He was older than Stevie. He was just over 40. So what was it that made me like him so much and so quickly? I don't know. I can't really explain it. But I looked forward to spending every day with him. The time we spent in class quickly turned to going out to dinner together, either with the whole class, the whole group, or just him and me, alone, having a drink or two and a little dancing. I had so much fun with him. I felt so relaxed and at ease with him. But we didn't make love. Oh, of course I thought about it. Who doesn't? Every night he'd walk me to my room, we'd cuddle and go to our rooms. In just 2 days, I'd come to regard him as a very dear friend. That's how quickly my feelings for him developed. But none of this is an excuse for what I did. I take full responsibility for making love to him. On the last night of class after dinner, he put his arm around my shoulders for the first time as we walked back to the hotel. And I walked right up to him and put my arm around his waist. And that's how we got back to the hotel. It just seemed so natural. At the door to my room, I found myself holding his hand and inviting him into my room, into my bed, and into my arms. I knew this was wrong. I didn't fully understand why I was doing it. I didn't even drink anything that night. But I did it. I knowingly cheated on my husband. I told myself it would be a one-time thing, and no one would ever know. No one would get hurt. In that moment, I wanted to be with Mark. And that was stronger than my integrity and loyalty to Steve. That was all it took. A random opportunity and a little rationalization. That was all it took for me to do what I knew was wrong. Mark was nice. Making love was so much better than with my husband. Add to that the thrill of novelty. In terms of lovemaking, all I'll say is that in terms of size, Mark was somewhat less gifted than Steve. So no. It wasn't that he was in any way better or worse physically than Steve. But with Mark, love was fun. No, it was joyful and wonderful. As enjoyable as the evening was, it wasn't worth the pain that followed. How I wish things had been different. But what was done was done. The next morning, the rising sun brought with it guilt. Guilt hit me like a sledgehammer to the head. Guilt for betraying my husband, guilt that I didn't know if Mark was married and had just dealt a fatal blow to his marriage. Even the guilt of pleasure. I couldn't bear to look at myself in the mirror. Mark left early and I never saw him again. All that day I felt like I was moving through a thick fog. I don't know how I managed to find the airport and my flight. Upon arrival, I was greeted by Steve. I pictured a bright smile and a joyful, enthusiastic, welcoming hug. "Jesus, Sarah, you look awful." Those were Steve's first words to me. "And we have to get you out of here. I don't want anyone to see you and me looking so awful." "Did you sleep in those clothes?" We grabbed my bags and headed home. I managed to hold back from crying the whole way. But when we got to the house, I almost lost my temper. And when I walked through the front door, I was truly lost. I dropped my carry-on and my purse and just started sobbing. "Steve, I have to tell you." It went about as bad as you can imagine. He totally exploded. He called me a cheater, a fool, and just about every other name you can think of. He asked me if I had my period. Is that why I did it anyway? Then he started to wonder if I was telling him the whole truth. "But was it just one time? Sarah?" he said. "How would I know?" "I can't believe you're saying this, Steve. Of course it's a one-time thing. I told you about it. If I hadn't said anything, you never would have known. What does he have that I don't? Steve demanded. Was he good in bed? Was he more handsome? What exactly was it about him that I didn't have that made you flush 12 years of marriage down the toilet? I don't know. But by this time I did. On the plane, I realized what it was about Mark that made me give up my marriage vows. He was funny. He made me feel good, relaxed. He was much more attentive in bed than Steve had ever been. But I knew Steve would kick me out the door if I said all that. I want a divorce. Steve! Why? I made a mistake. I admit it. I take full responsibility for it. I'll do anything to fix it, I swear. Not interested anymore. I just can't believe you did this. Why? What does he have that I don't? Oh, God, I just wanted to tell him, spit it out in his face. But I couldn't. I don't know. But Steve wasn't done yet. Am I not good enough for you? He demanded an answer again. God, what will all our friends and family think when we get divorced? Do you know how I'll look? Everyone will know we weren't a perfect couple. Does that really mean that much to you? Yes. God, how do you think we got to where we are? Because I worked hard to make our relationship perfect and keep it perfect. No, this is all on you. I'll tell everyone that you cheated on me, so at least I'll keep my reputation. Steve, I said pleadingly, can't you just sleep on this for one night? I told you, and not 5 minutes later you're already talking about divorce. You're damn right I am. Just like that? You don't love me anymore? No. Can I earn your trust and love again? Can you forgive me? I will do anything to make this right. I can't forgive you when I don't know why you did it, because I don't know what I'm forgiving. I don't want to see your face anymore. We're done. Why? I yelled. Because we had the perfect marriage, and apparently that wasn't enough for you, and you cheated on me. You can't say why you did it, so you can't say it will never happen again. Even worse, if you don't know why you cheated, there's a good chance that whatever set of conditions caused it still exists. And that means you can cheat again. So no thanks. I don't want my heart cut out a second time. But we know that's not going to happen. We know, Sarah. Yeah, I knew you'd never cheat on me, until you didn't. So, we don't know it won't happen again. I feel like I can't trust you or anything you say, and I can't live in that uncertainty. And I certainly won't let your promiscuous behavior reflect on my standing in the eyes of society. Steve, this could be anyone's story, not just ours. It's happened to a lot of couples and they've been through it. It's nothing but the same risk you would take with anyone you might marry. It's just life. And sometimes we have to put up with the horrible things it throws at us. Steve, I swear to God I'll make it up to you if you'll let me. This wasn't some cataclysmic event. It was you who stabbed us in the back with your little mistake. And that's a risk I don't intend to take a second time. You can't be serious. We wanted to have kids. Well, we did. Are you going to throw this away because I cheated once? You don't want to have kids? To be a father? If it was you who cheated, I'd forgive you under those circumstances. I'd try to work it out, figure out where we went wrong, and try to fix it. No. It wasn't we that was wrong. It was you that threw it all away, and there's a risk you could do it again. But I won't. We've talked about this. You already swore once. Your words aren't enough. Suddenly, I was overcome with blind rage. Steve, you think you've got it all figured out? You're going to throw away all of our time together and the family we could have built because of one time? Because you're primarily concerned about how you're going to look in society? And then he started saying unforgivable things. You're an idiot, Sarah. We had everything. We had such a great life. We were the envy of all our friends. And you go and ruin our marriage and you can't even tell us why? You know damn well why you did it. You wanted to do it. You were horny, tempted, thought you wouldn't get caught, and thought it would be fun. You ruined the life we could have had. And you can't even tell us why. So if you think I'm going to sign up for a sequel, you're wrong. And then he said it. Worst thing that ever happened. Thank God we don't have kids yet. Thank God it happened before we had any. In that sense, screwing around has been a blessing. So thank you, Sarah. I couldn't take it. You know what? Maybe you're right. Maybe my deception was a hidden blessing. You want to know why I slept with him? He made me feel good. He was fun. I could talk to him without my words being critiqued and dissected. And that was before I slept with him. And you know what else? He was better in bed than you. He cared enough to make it good for both of us. So what if my fooling around made you go away so I could find a better man? Then that was a blessing, and I thank God for that. Well, good news. You're starting to weed out the candidates. He left the house that night. We never communicated again except through our attorneys, and when the divorce was settled, he left the state and wouldn't tell me where he had moved. His threat to tell everyone it was all my fault? Turns out it was just a threat. He didn't tell anyone we knew, our neighbors or our friends. He just didn't see the point or couldn't allow himself to be looked at as someone who had been cheated on. For the next 3 months, I went to bed every night wishing I could just die in my sleep. And in the morning, when the sun came up again, it would raise me up, kicking and screaming and not wanting to live. It just went on, regardless of what was happening, what we were doing, or how we might feel about it. I did my work on autopilot. I spent lunches at my desk in my office with the door closed, just crying my eyes out. But you can't cry forever. Stuff happens, often far beyond what is possible. But life goes on. When my grief over what I had done was gone, when my grief over my lost husband, my broken marriage, my missed chance at a family and a great life was gone, I started to get back to my normal self. Well, I will always mourn for what I lost, and for how I lost it, for how Steve and I both lost it. But eventually I learned to keep my cool in public. I began to rejoice in seeing the sunrise again. I began to look at men again. A few years later, I learned from his mother that Steve had begun to decline. He became almost impossible to work with, intolerant of anyone's mistakes or mishaps. He would get into any project at work to the point where the project was paralyzed. He then made a series of disastrous decisions at work that cost the company millions. He was fired. He never remarried. He became an alcoholic. Unemployed and spending all his money on cheap whiskey, he lost his accounts and the bank foreclosed on his house. The day he was evicted, he ran out into the driveway and threw himself in front of a large truck. It seemed he couldn't forgive even himself, let alone anyone else. I cried for days. It was like losing him, losing my marriage, all over again. Things could have been so different. It could have been so much better. I jeopardized our marriage and our lives with my bad decision. It was 100% my fault, forever. But Steve ruined our marriage and his life because of his absolute unwillingness to forgive, and because he was more concerned with his image in the eyes of everyone else on earth except us. I even cried more because of all of this. In the days and weeks that followed, our story became known to all our friends and neighbors. I wasn't going to lie about anything, not about myself or Steve. A few friends blamed me and never spoke to me again. But the big surprise to me was how many of our neighbors and friends stayed friends with me. They all told me the same thing. They never liked Steve. He was too much of a, "look how perfect I am" type braggart. He was always quick to point out what he thought was wrong with everything our friends and neighbors did. Everyone we knew basically only socialized with us because they liked me. Most of our friends told Steve good riddance, and that I was better off without him. One of my biggest supporters was my mother-in-law. She came to the house demanding an explanation. Steve, her own son, had not told her why his marriage had broken up. I told her everything. When I finished, she came up to me and slapped me in the face. "That's for cheating on my son." Then she hugged me tightly and said, "That's for getting rid of him." Lucky you. I'm sorry I didn't raise a better man for you. We hugged each other and cried for over an hour. Tears were my most frequent companion in the days and weeks that followed. I had plenty to cry over. But soon enough, those tears dried up. Time heals all wounds. A few years passed, and I remarried and was happy. and had a little boy and a little girl. I never cheated on my new husband. But on the other hand, I never loved my first husband, Steve, the way I love my second husband, Fred. This time, being older and wiser, I chose a man I felt good with, as I once did with Mark. A man who didn't have a perfection complex. They say everything happens for a reason. I don't know anything about that. Maybe what I told Steve in our last conversation was true, that my one-time episode of infidelity was my break up a marriage to a man who won't be a good father card. I thought Steve was the perfect man in our perfect marriage. But there were no serious tests. And when did the test happen? He failed. Until I met Mark and spent some time with him, I never knew how exciting spending time with a man could be. Until then, I never realized how rigid and relentless Steve was, or what an inattentive lover Steve was, or at least I didn't consciously realize all of that. So, was my cheating episode my subconscious mind's way of freeing me from this marriage? Or was it God's plan for me to learn what it's like to have an unforgiving spouse so that I would better appreciate my second husband and realize what can be lost by never forgiving anything? I regret every day that I cheated on Steve. I wish I hadn't dealt such a terrible blow to our marriage. I wish Steve had been just a little more understanding. If he had stayed, I would have done anything to make him happy. And I mean anything. But what was done was done. And it was in the next stage, which is where we've moved on from this point, that Steve failed. Or was it me who failed? But I never would have realized Steve's true nature if I hadn't made my terrible mistake. And once we had kids, it would have been too painful to break up. And I wouldn't have the life I have now with Fred and me and our children. Did my first marriage have to break up to realize all this? Maybe my cheating episode was supposed to be Steve's chance to learn, grow, and overcome all the bad things that can happen in life? His chance to learn forgiveness? At least a little leniency to keep a good marriage and life together? But he blew it. Lacking the ability to forgive, I don't think any of us will last long in this world. Steve couldn't. If these were lessons we were all meant to learn, I wish it hadn't been so painful. And it ended badly for Steve. But we can all wish for whatever we want. God has His own plans for us. We may not like it, but we have to learn a lesson from it. I don't. What I do know is that when my husband, Fred, came home from a long trip, I could see that something was wrong. He admitted that he had slept with another woman on the trip. I hugged him and said, "Okay, I understand how this can happen. We're going to figure out what's wrong between us, what caused it, and we're going to fix it. We'll work it out." It took a while, but a lot less time than you'd think. Hurt feelings? We had a whole truckload of all of that to deal with, just like anyone else in a situation like this. But we met the problems face to face, together. We had to see a marriage counselor to help us work through it, but even in our most difficult moment, we didn't even think to say the word divorce. Our children never knew about our problems. We kept our marriage and our family intact, and we built a stronger, even more committed relationship than we had before. And it was a good thing we did, because life doesn't end for us until we are in the grave, and we had many more life challenges ahead of us as the years went by. Financial matters, work matters, illnesses, temptation from others for both of us, problems with the children as they grew older. We both made mistakes, but we forgave each other and moved on, and that's what we taught our children as best we could. You are human. You're going to make mistakes and make bad decisions. You may hurt others, intentionally or unintentionally, and others will hurt you. The only saving grace, straight from God, is forgiveness. Fred and I have endured all of life's trials. We have built a beautiful life together for ourselves and our children. Perfection or forgiveness. As human beings, we cannot be perfect. And even if we could, I suspect it wouldn't suit us very well, and chasing after it only leads to destruction. So thank God for forgiveness. You can have anything you want. The only thing that limits us in forgiveness is ourselves. The end.